So now our application is completely configured to work with BaasBox. So we can start to create some of the code that'll allow us to log in, log out, and so on. So let's go to our home view controller. And what we're going to do is we are going to, in our home view controller, when the app first loads, check to see if the user is currently logged in. If they are, we'll just stay on the home view controller and they can play the quiz or add a new question. If they're not currently logged in, then we will show them a login view where they can either sign up if they don't have an account or log in if they already do have an account. So let's go ahead and add that functionality now, and we're going to do that in the view will appear method. So we need to override that. Function, view will appear, and we'll initialize the superclass. Will appear, animated. And then in order for the application to communicate with the BaasBox server, we need to create an instance of the client. And that's going to be a BAA client, and we'll use shared client. So this creates an instance of a BaasBox client, and the first thing we'll do is check to see if client is authenticated. That means, is the current user already logged in? If they are, we'll change the status label.text to logged in. And if they're not, we'll change the status label text to not logged in. And then we need to transfer the person to another view controller where they can log in. We'll write that line here and then build that functionality in a few minutes. So we'll do self.navigation controller, because remember we embedded this in a navigation controller. .perform segue with identifier, and the identifier will be show login, and again we haven't written that yet, and the sender will use nil. And notice that Xcode automatically made this an optional. Okay, so this is the method that will take care of either transferring us to the next view or keeping us right there. So that means we actually need to create that new view. So let's go back to the main storyboard. I'm going to go to my object library and get a new view controller. I'll put it right here. Whoa, might be a little too low. Okay, so now this is my navigation controller, so I'm going to do a control click and I'm going to drag to my newly created view controller, and I'm going to choose the show detail segue. And you can see that it creates a segue here. And I'm going to click on this segue, and in the identity inspector, I'm going to give it the identifier show login, which was exactly what we called it in our home view controller, and you have to make sure that these two are the same. So now we have a connection from our navigation controller to our login view controller, and the segue's identifier is show login. So now we need a view controller file to control this, so I'm going to go to Command N, make it a Cocoa Touch class. I'm going to call it login view controller. Make sure it's in the right group. And now I have that file appears here in my project navigator. So let's look at the main storyboard again. We are going to, actually let me go back to my login view controller, and let's make sure that the class is login view controller. So now these two are connected. So in my view controller, I need a couple of fields. I need a place to put the username. I need a place to put the password. I need a button to sign up if they have to sign up. And I need a login button if they need to log in. And then I'm going to just create a label to show some error messages. So let's go ahead and add those different elements, and then we'll connect it to our view controller. So let's go to a text field. I'm going to add a text field here. I'm going to put another one for the password. I'm going to create a login button, and I'll call it login. I'm going to create a sign up button. I'm also going to add a spinner, an activity indicator, that while it's thinking, this button or this object will spin to show activity. And then finally, I'm going to need a label to show error messages. Okay, so there's all the elements I need. Let's go ahead and use the assistant editor, and I'm going to start creating outlets for each of these. So I'll call this one username field. This will be the password field. And notice I haven't put any constraints in, and I should put constraints in, but since that's really not the focus of this project, I leave it to you to put constraints in so it looks right. You'll notice that when we run the app, it probably won't look very good. But again, that's not the focus of this app, but it's important to do. Okay, so I'm going to add, this is a login button. I'll create the actions for these in a little bit. But right now, these are just the outlets. I need a sign up button. I'll call this a spinner. And then my error label. I'll add a little space there. Okay, so now I have connections to each of these. One other thing I'd like to do for my password is I'm going to click on this. This is going to be the password field. I'm going to click on the attributes inspector, and I'm going to check the secure text entry so that it shows up dots instead of just having my password kind of hanging out there. Okay, let's go ahead and run this just to see what it looks like. So I'm going to hit Command R. Get a couple of warnings here. So you see I have everything here, except I don't see my yeah, let me just zoom in. Let me scale this because you usually can't see it. There we go. Now you can see them. The resolution is too bad. There's my username field. Here's my password field. And I've got login and sign up buttons that don't do anything for right now. Let's go ahead and stop this. So at least we know everything is there. Okay, so let's do a little bit more setup. We're going to add a couple things to our view did load. We're going to add placeholder text to these at runtime. And just to show you the different ways you can do it, I'm going to add placeholder text for the username field in the identity inspector or the attributes inspector. I'll call it username. But it's also to implement that via code. So in my view did load, I'm going to go to password field dot placeholder equals password. And I'll see that at runtime. And then a couple other things, spinner hides when stopped equals true, which means if the spinner is not actively spinning, it won't show up. And then we'll set the error label .text to be blank at runtime. So now let's go ahead and run this. And you can see that both of them have placeholder text. One I did in the attributes inspector and one I did in the code. And both the spinner and the error label text are hidden. So our initial setup is good to go. Let me go back to here and stop it. And now let's start implementing the code to log in. So right now, I think I'm done with this. I'm going to click there, and I just want to see my login view controller for right now. So I need one more property here. Since I'm trying to log in and out, I need another client property. So I'm going to say let client equal BAA client dot shared client. Okay, so now I have that client property. I actually do need this for one more second. I'm going to go to my main storyboard. I made properties for my two buttons, but now I need to create actions for these two buttons. So I'm going to go drag here and create a login tapped, making sure it's an action and that the type is a button. And then I'm going to do a sign up tapped, making it an action and a button. Okay, let's go ahead and implement the code that'll allow us to do that. So for the login tapped, the first thing I want to have happen is I want to make sure they can't tap the login button again. So they don't want to tap it twice. So I'm going to disable it. So I'll say enabled equals false. And I'll do that same thing for the sign up button. Just so again the user can't tap it twice. And then we will start animating the spinner. Well, the command to authenticate is pretty simple. We're going to use the client. In order to authenticate a client, we need two pieces of information. We need a username and a password. So we're going to pass it the username field information and the password field information. So we're going to go authenticate user. And again, the username will be the username field dot text. The password will be the password field dot text. And remember for the completion is the block of code that takes place after the authentication piece has been done. So the client is going to use the username and password to try to authenticate the person. And after that's done, if it works or not, then we'll run this completion block. So we're actually, let me go ahead and do this so we can see this a little bit more. So this completion, instead of just being a single line, is going to be a closure. So it's going to be a whole series of code. So I'm going to put a brace, and this closure is going to take two parameters, a success parameter of type Boolean, an error parameter of type NSError, and now I can go ahead and write my closure code. So once the user's been authenticated, we're going to stop the spinner from animating. We are going to enable the buttons again. So let's do login button enabled equals true. And then we'll do the same thing for the sign up button. And then we'll check. So if success comes back as true, that means it worked. Well, let's just take us back to our previous view controller. So we just need to dismiss the view controller. Animated will be true, and we don't need to do anything for the completion. So if the user was successfully able to log in, let's just go ahead and go back to the previous view controller. Otherwise, if it's not successful, let's see what that error is. So we'll go to self.errorLabel.text equals error, so the error that comes back, localized description. And that'll give us some idea of what went wrong. And then let's just finish this closure, and our errors go away. So again, it's just checking to see if the client's authenticated, puts all the buttons back. If it works, great, let's take us back to our home view controller. If not, show us what the error is. Well, let's go ahead and see if that works. Let's run this. So I'm going to go ahead and type a username. Let's call it default. And I'll give it the password, and I'll click login. And if I go back and look at this error, it says App Transport Security has blocked a clear text resource load. All this means is if I go to my BaasBox, this is an HTTP URL. Well, actually, we can probably see that better in Xcode. See, in Xcode, it's HTTP. Apple wants you to always use HTTPS because it's more secure. So we need to tell Apple that, it's okay, we trust this site, so we need to put an exception in. So we'll modify that in the next lesson and finish our login and sign up.